All right, so here we have a KTM 2011. All right, so here we have a 2011 KTM 690 SMC. I'll give you the quick rundown of it. It's a 654cc single-cylinder engine. It has, I think, around 65 horsepower in its current configuration. This bike might actually have a little bit more because of what's been done to it, which I'll explain later. Um, there are newer versions of it. Husqvarna was bought by KTM, and they produced a 701, which is essentially the same bike, but it actually is 690 cc's. It has a second counterbalancer. I think it has dual spark, but everything else is pretty much the same, other than the aesthetics, how it looks. So, yeah, you can check out the specs for this bike. Of course, they're pretty common, pretty easy to find information on these. But I'll go over sort of what's been done to this bike and give you my thoughts on it. So, like I said, 2011. So this bike was produced in 2008 originally. That was the first version of it. And since then, a few things changed. So, and I think 2010, they upgraded the rims to be tubeless. So I think only the 2010 and 11 model had these black tubeless rims. I think the newer ones all have the orange ones, which I actually prefer the black. I don't like too much orange. I think it's nice, but too hard to keep clean, and I don't know. I think the black just looks cooler with the bike. Let's see. I think that was pretty much it. I think the brakes and the suspension are all the same. Oh, the bodywork was slightly different. You know, the 2008s had the orange bodywork, which I actually had one of those before, and I sold it and I regretted it, so I bought another one. Yeah, so this has the black and white plastics. You can see that the graphics have been changed. I might do something about that, but yeah. So real quick, a background on the bikes that I've had, just so you know where I'm coming from. I've had a few different supermotos. I've had a Suzuki DRZ 400, which I put a big bore kit and a FCR carb and the MRD exhaust. A really fun bike, great to learn how to do that kind of stuff if you've never done it before. So yeah, that was sort of the first supermoto I had, and then I bought a Husqvarna SM610, which also is a production bike, street legal, all that kind of stuff. Has much better brakes and suspension and engine than DRZ, but it's a Husky, so they are notorious for being difficult to find parts for, and having little things that, like, the workmanship isn't quite up to the level of like a KTM, for example, or a Suzuki, which, you know, the Suzukis were stone reliable, never had an issue with it, whereas the Husky had little issues here and there. Then I bought a 2008 KTM SMC, which I mentioned earlier, and I had that for about a year, and I did a few things to it. I have a video up of that if you want to check that out. But really fun bike, but I just decided it was time for a change, so I sold that and bought a Yamaha MT-09, which is an amazing engine, like probably one of the best engines out there right now. I love the triple. There's just torque everywhere. It's a really linear power. The transmission is super smooth. The brakes are great. The looks are good, in my opinion. The only thing that bothered me about that bike was the suspension, and it was just something that I never quite got sorted out. So yeah, I didn't want to put money into it because I just didn't like the riding position as much. It was a great bike. I didn't have it for very long, probably about 6 months, and then I sold that. And then this popped up and I bought it for a really good price. It had some issues. It had obviously been dropped, but I mean, supermotos, that's pretty common, whatever. So I just took some time and put some effort into fixing this up a little bit. So that's a little bit about where I've come from, my background in bikes. I've had a couple others, but you know, not really important. I prefer supermoto style riding. I think it's really fun, and that's what motorcycling is all about for me. So let me get into some things that I've done to this bike. The suspension is stock, so it's WP front and back. I have adjusted the preload. I just changed the fork oil in the forks, which is actually fairly easy to do. So yeah, right now it's pretty good. I feel like the suspension settings are just on the standard setting, which I'm fine with. So nothing done to the suspension. Brakes are also stock. It has Brembo front and back, front and rear. Haven't touched the pads at all. They still have some meat on them, so I'm not going to do anything to that. The seat is also stock, which is not the best seat, I'll be honest. It's just not very good. It's really narrow, and the padding isn't that great, so you're going to get some butt rash if you ride for any length of time. I have done it. I went on been on 8-hour rides and got home and was tired, but if you get one of those like bike seats, which has the padding in the right spot, you should be fine. Or you can go and upgrade it. I actually had a Seat Concepts on my other SMC, which I thought was really good. It's about 300 bucks, I think. So I might just actually go ahead and order another one for this bike. So yeah, that's that. The things I've actually changed on this bike, bought some cheap handguards, which I think are a necessity. They're really cheap and just, good insurance to have. You're not going to break your lever if you crash. It saves your hands, all that kind of stuff, right? Obviously, someone had changed the decals before, so that's whatever. Then like little stuff like this bling. All these parts I bought on either eBay or a website called AliExpress, A-L-I Express, which is a subsidiary of Alibaba, which is the huge Chinese company. But this shit's super cheap. These are much better than stock. I took the cleats off because I'm not using motocross boots at the moment. They do require some modification. You need to file the hole out a little bit to get it so that they can actually rotate and get the pin in there so it's not binding. But that's not a big deal. Oil cap, it just looks better. The plastic one I don't really like. Oil filter covers on both sides, those just look cool again. That's just little bling stuff. It's cheap. These are again AliExpress. They're just as good as something you might pay a lot more for, and it's really good to have rear set stands so that you can work on your bike a lot easier. I did also change the sprocket on the rear tire here. So stock, the gearing is 1642, and this is a 45 rear sprocket, which I think is the Enduro gearing. Luckily the chain, I didn't have to adjust the chain at all because it's long enough. So you have these adjusters on the rear axle blocks you can flip over. So if I go to a 42, I can just flip it and there's still enough adjustment, so I don't have to just swap the chain out. All you have to do is switch out the sprocket. So that's really awesome. I prefer the 45 gearing. I think it's more, I can easily go, 100 miles an hour is about the max that I would go on this bike anyway, but it hits 100 no problem. And it's just a little more torquey. For first and second gear, are shorter, of course, but it's fine. It's whatever. I changed out this clutch lever. Also, the crank cover bolt right here is plastic, which I really don't like. So, and it has a weird, like, large Allen key size, which you can use like a spark plug, or not a spark plug, but an oil plug bolt in reverse, and like clamp it down. And so anyway, this has a normal size Allen key, so swap that out. So that's that. Some basic shit. Just put some, like a generic mirror and RAM mount, which has the USB port plugged into the accessory port. So when the key is on, that's on. But it doesn't charge when the key is off. So that's that. This is a Perrin Moto rear rack, which fits the bike perfectly. Like, I don't know if you can see it well, but it just lines up perfectly. It just replaces the 4 bolts that are used for the handle. Really, really high quality. There are instructions for this as well. It has all the spacers and all the hardware needed to install. So just really, really good. And if you're going to load anything on the back of this bike, you really need something like this, because the rear subframe is actually the gas tank, which leads me to the next part. I've replaced the, I don't know if you can see it, but the lower tank bolts and the upper tank bolts as well, which I'll show you in a second. But yeah, so basically these bikes are known to have issues with that. So I highly recommend doing this if you're going to load anything on the back of the bike, just for safety's sake. You don't want that shit to be breaking when you're on the road. And then the upper tank mount bolts, you can't really see because of the, this is in the way, but basically right there, and then the same thing on the other side. It just has a stronger bolt. It also has an insert as well as a bolt on the other side, whereas the stock ones just have a screw that goes through, which tends to break. So it's cheap insurance, again, just something that you want to replace if you're planning on taking this on a trip or you do a lot of riding. I highly recommend doing that. And you can order both of those products on this Perun Moto website, Perun. The shipping, the turnover time is really fast, and the price is reasonable in my opinion. So highly recommend their stuff. Next, since the seat is off, this is an Evo 1 Airbox lid. So as you can see, it has these sort of mesh cutouts, so it allows more air into the intake. It also has a different high flow air filter in there, and so yeah, it just gives the bike more air, which means you can give the bike more fuel. Now stock, these bikes run lean anyway, so what that means is you can upgrade your map. You can plug in a Tune ECU cable there and download Tune ECU, or excuse me, an OBD2 cable, and then download Tune ECU, which is free, and you can upgrade your map. Speaking of maps, I actually am using a modified fuel map. So I changed the timing slightly, as well as made it richer, basically throughout the whole range. And this is based on a forum that has tons of information and data on. But so far the bike is running really good. It's actually running cooler, which these bikes are known to run hot. I've had no issues with anything. There's no extra ticking noises or any kind of knock sounds, so I think we're good there. So yeah, obviously if you're going to upgrade your Airbox, you need a more free-flowing exhaust as well. So when you do that, you can turn off the SAS and O2 sensor in Tune ECU, which you can't see in the head here, but on the top of the head there's a valve for the secondary air system, which is the SAS, and you can buy a blanking plate for that, so you can remove the shit that's on the side of the bike and just cap that off. And then, you know, if you're doing valve checks or anything like that, it's actually a lot easier to remove your valve cover, so that helps as well. But it's more for performance. And then you can cap off, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little bung there, so you don't need your O2 sensor either. And I've heard like some guys have stalling issues, and removing that actually helps, so it has multiple benefits to it. So yeah, so those are some things that you can do for performance, which are also good for utility for doing maintenance and stuff. Last weekend I went for a ride and I didn't even notice my second exhaust shield came off, and these things are like 50 bucks. It's kind of crazy how expensive they are. But anyway, this bike came with an Akrapovic exhaust, which is nice, but it had been crashed and you could really tell. So what I did is just took it apart and or took it off the bike rather, and just cleaned it up a bit. The end cap which is titanium, was all messed up, so I just kind of did a shitty job, but cut that off. And then I had to trim the exhaust tip as well, just to make sure that it was flat again. And I think it looks okay. I mean, you could buy another titanium cap for $100 about, and put that on, and then you'd have to obviously drill the rivets out, buy a new, because this one's kind of messed up, buy the metal trim that goes around there and rivet it back on, blah 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 blah. But you definitely need an exhaust if you're going to do any kind of performance stuff like that. But stock, you don't really need to, but the stock exhaust is so heavy and so hot. It runs super hot, so and it doesn't do the bike any justice in terms of sound. So that's something that I highly recommend doing. This bike also actually had the rear, like I said, it had been crashed and it was really obvious. The taillight survived, but the sort of handle rack system that goes inside under the tank here, I don't know if you can see that, had broken off. So I got this really cheap $10 taillight, and just rigged it up and just cut some holes, and it's pretty solid, and I just mount my plate up to it, and it works really good. So, and it fits the bike, the angle's good. So if you don't want to spend $100 or whatever on a new taillight or a new system, you can easily find shit like this on eBay, no problem. Let's see what else. I think that's pretty much it. So I guess I'll start it up and you can see how it sounds. But yeah, I'll just do a quick walk around. I think it looks pretty good with some of the little bit of orange bling, not too much. I've seen bikes that have nicer graphics kits and stuff, which I may end up doing on this bike. Oh yeah, it has a skid plate which came with it, which I think the stock SMC has a plastic skid plate, so it's not going to do much if you do any kind of off-road or anything. But this is really good for protecting your engine and your oil, air oil filter plugs, your water pump, all that kind of stuff at the bottom here. So yeah, I would recommend that. This bike does actually come stock with passenger pegs too, but I put these plastic ones on. I think they just look better. So that's that kind of stuff. I think that's pretty much it. I might actually change out this front fender too to the LC4, and I'll make another video if I end up doing that later. But yeah, I think the bike looks really good, and it's more importantly really fun to ride. So let me start it up. You can see how it sounds. I think this bike has just under 20,000 kilometers. So let's see. Yeah, 19,927. So it's not heavy life. So yeah, I really like the sound of the Akrapovic with no baffle in. At low speed and not open throttle, it doesn't sound very loud. It has a really good low hollow sound. But of course, if you're gonna brap it, which I'll do, it's loud. So yeah, I mean, if you're on the road, you can get people's attention without honking, no problem. So overall opinion of this bike, 5 out of 5 stars. There's almost nothing I would do to this bike to improve it. I might say the seat, but KTM has actually done that. The newer seats, I believe, are a little bit better. They have a little more foam. They're a little bit wider. So I'm guessing they're a little more comfortable. I haven't actually sat on one, the newer ones. The only other gripe I have with this bike is the fuel tank cover, the gas cap. This thing fucking leaks, and it comes from one of two places. The bottom here has a little Vuitton ring, like that fuel resistant rubber, and the seal just isn't very good, just the way that it's designed. Plus, this is recessed into the tank, so any kind of dirt, you can see any kind of shit that builds up here. I think they changed this on the 2010 model, because my old 2008, this little lip was actually flat. It was lower by about 15 or 20 millimeters, and so shit would easily fall in there. The other place is here. If the seal on the actual gas cap isn't good with the top of the cap, especially when you fill it up, your gas will just start leaking out. So yeah, that's kind of bullshit. But you can buy an aftermarket one, but for such an expensive bike, you shouldn't have to be worried about that kind of stuff. That's just my opinion. But like I said, I bought this bike for a really good deal. I'm in South Korea, by the way, and the used market here is very overpriced, to say the least. You cannot base it on any other country's prices. There aren't many street legal supermotos available here, and it's really difficult, if not impossible, to build a dirt bike and make it a legal supermoto. If it didn't come with a title initially, it's almost impossible to make it street legal. So you don't have many options. So my point here is that these bikes maintain their resale value. I'm just going to tell you how much I paid for this. It was 4.5 million won, which is about just under 4,000 US dollars. Which in the US, that would probably be what you'd pay for this bike. So I feel really good about that. In Korea, that's like almost half of what you would normally pay for this bike. New, these bikes were like 15 million won, which is like 12 grand. So you can see the what I'm getting at here. The point is that everything here is more expensive. So, you know, talking about the value of the bike, I think I got a pretty good deal. Plus, I know enough about them to work on them. I would never take this to the KTM dealership. Those guys are just slow as fuck, and they're probably inept mechanics. So I wouldn't let them touch my bike. Download the manual, order your parts online, do the work yourself. This is definitely a bike that you should be able to do that on. It's not overly complicated. Plus, like I said, with a Tune ECU and the OBD cable, you can just do all the shit yourself. So again, like I said, my opinion of this bike is it's really good. It's the second one I've had, so obviously I really like it. If you're a taller rider, it's really comfortable for you. If you're a newer rider, I would say it's not a really scary bike. It does have a couple different throttle maps, which you can adjust under the seat. But yeah, if you're like a beginning rider, I would say, you know, just take caution, because this bike could get you in trouble real easy. It likes to wheelie, but it's also confidence inspiring because the suspension and brakes are really good and the riding position is really comfortable. So, you know, you kind of have to decide what you want, not to mention the cost. KTM is, you know, a premium bike brand, so it's not going to be as cheap as something like a Suzuki DRZ, but it's also not going to have the same performance. So it really just depends on what you're looking for. For me, I've been riding for, you know, 20 years, and I just know what I like now, and this is it. So I may decide to go another route, get a different bike in the future, but for now, this is doing it for me. I'm really happy with it. So anyway, I hope this helps you if you're curious about this bike, or you're making a choice of whether or not to pick one up. I would just say go for it. Pull the trigger if you can find one in a decent condition, and you know what you're looking at. It's going to be a bike that you're going to have a great time on. It also really helps you improve your riding skills. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think. Leave a comment down below. All right, peace.